And we're live. And just like that, we are live. Hello, friends, and welcome to another magical episode of Catt Chatt. My name is Tom Cat, and I am joined by the fabulous, the queerly femtastic, as her name describes, Ijoke. Or is she okay? Uh, as she is more commonly known on Instagram and Facebook and so on and so forth. Joke hosts a monthly podcast or a weekly podcast called?
It's a monthly podcast. It's called Cheers and Queers. It's a boozy podcast about Black queer life. We drop an episode once a month. We drink.
Naturally.
And we drink and we talk about shit. And it's actually been a really great experience. I didn't realize that this is year 3 of the podcast.
Look at you go.
Yeah. I was like, 3 years? What is that? So it's a super fun thing that like I'm glad that we have been able to like continue.
Yes. And I am very, very happy that you have been. Well, first of all, have you been prosperous? Like, how are you doing?
I mean, so long story short, everything fell apart last year. Like my life, like just like things fell apart last year, and so I've spent a lot of the last like 8 months putting things in place so that like I have the time and space to do the things that I like to do. Because, you know, at this point, ain't nobody else gonna do it but me. And so that has been a really great experience. And it means sometimes I do spend a hell of a lot of time building a cosplay or like crocheting something like super intricate or, you know, learning a dance move that takes me 6 months to figure out. And sometimes I get on an airplane and move to Puerto Rico for a while.
As anyone would, as anybody would.
So that's my most recent adventure. I needed it. New York was cold. And the combination of cold and being by myself and not being able to see other people was really like getting to me. And I was like,
yeah,
what if I just went to a place where there was sunshine? Would that help? The answer is yes. It helps.
Well, I'm glad. That's very exciting to hear. So you decided to go to Puerto Rico on a whim.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here for a month, so like I had to. There was like significant planning
I was gonna say I just decided to randomly go to Puerto Rico for a while. No big deal. But peace, toodles. See you when I see you.
Yeah, there was actual like planning involved, and like folks helped me out on this end, and folks helped me out on the New York end. Somebody's got to take care of the cat.
Somebody has to.
But yeah, I like hit a point where I was like, you know what? I need sunshine. My birthday is this month, so I was like, I need sunshine. I would like sunshine on my birthday. So here I am.
Well, I'm thrilled. You sound like you're thriving. I'm absolutely thrilled.
Go outside.
I mean, you go outside here and you freeze a little bit, and then you go outside in Puerto Rico and it's like, wait, no, I'm not freezing. I'm living.
Yeah, legitimately, like the sun on my skin has made an amazing
world of difference
in my like mental health, for real.
Well, before we get into the topic at hand, please tell everybody about how you created Cheers and Queers.
Yeah. So Cheers and Queers was an idea that I had, in like 2015, 2016. And I actually was listening to a podcast that no longer makes new episodes, but is literally the best podcast in the world. It's called Another Round, and it was hosted by these two amazing Black women, Heaven and Tracy. And they had a guest on the show. His name is Teak Milan, and he like made a joke about like Cheers and Queers, and I was like, oh, that'd be a great name for a podcast. So I put like a Facebook post up. I don't know, probably was a Facebook status. I was like, oh, like if I hosted a podcast about like Black queer shit, like would you listen? And people were like, yes. You talk about this, you should do that. And so I like created this whole crazy spreadsheet with all of these ideas that people were really excited about. But I knew that I wanted to host the podcast with someone else.
Yeah.
Because I was like, a lot of these things are like conversations.
Yeah.
And so I made this crazy spreadsheet. I talked to my friend Lance John, who is the head of the podcast network that I'm a part of called Gifted Sounds Network. And he was like, whenever you're ready. And I was like, I'm not ready. So it's the spreadsheet just kind of hung out in my Google Drive for a while. And then in 2017, I was working with a friend, Kyria, on something else, actually, like something, we were doing something else. Yeah. We're like getting to host a live show together. She was like, oh, it'd be great if we could like do this more, if we like had a podcast. And I was like, what if I told you that I have an entire podcast already put together and a network to host it on and people who are willing to help, and all I needed was a person who wanted to do it with me. And so that is how Cheers and Queers was born. And so we have been running since then. Kyria is actually on hiatus. She's working on some really exciting life stuff that I can't talk about, but she will announce soon. So everybody
we won't talk about it. We won't talk about it.
So go follow her online because the life stuff will be announced. So at the
end we'll do all the plugs and whatnot. As a matter of fact, I'll even like write it. I'll like write it in the banner section. Yeah, I first to my viewers, I am sorry that I'm not in my usual studio right now. There's a reason behind it, but I'm too much of a lady to tell. So we have I'm gonna be continuing on the show. I'm gonna have some guest hosts. People are strangely very excited. They're like, yes, I do want to come and like drink and talk shit with you on the internet. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I want. Thank you. So yeah, we're gonna keep releasing monthly, and maybe my hope is that like things will settle down enough for us to have a like live Cheers and Queers birthday in August, but we'll see. Well, yeah, because no one really knows what's going to happen in another 3, 4, 5 months. Which brings us to the topic at hand. So when me and Ajoke started talking about what we wanted to discuss, because usually whenever I have a guest on, I'm like, what would you like to talk about? Is there anything you would like to focus on specifically? Ajoke said, let's talk about lewd cosplays. And I'm like, well, I definitely enjoy the conversation about lewd cosplay, especially because since the pandemic has hit, a lot of people have started doing OnlyFans or Just for Fans, and they've been doing lewd cosplays. So it's definitely been a thing that has happened. And you know, you can call it what you want. You can call it lewd cosplay, you can call it cosplay modeling, you can call it porn. But there's a certain demographic that will be catered to for doing such and such. So before we even went live, I had asked Ajoke, do you have an OnlyFans? To which she replied,
no, it's too much work. It's literally too much work. So like, I think that this is a question people ask me often. So, you know, in addition to cosplay, I also do burlesque and pole dancing. And I've continued to do burlesque and pole dancing in the pandemic, right? Like lots of dancing to people on screens. And so for me, that kind of content creation has never gone away. And so a lot of folks have asked me like, oh, are you going to do an OnlyFans or a Patreon or something like that? And I'm like, well, I'm still creating content that you can engage with live, right?
Yeah.
The same way, like, if you're like building something for a con and you got a deadline because the show floor opens on this day, right?
Yes.
So like similarly for shows and things like that, like I'm like, you know, I have a show on the 26th of this month, right? Anything that I'm doing needs to be done so that I can interact and engage with the audience on the 26th.
Yes.
Right. So like in that way, I'm still beholden to like time and dates and things like that. And so I just don't have the capacity to dance and, you know, continue to perform and like do shows and create exclusive content and run my podcast and, you know, hold on
and
to my
do
bubble job.
all of these other things that you've been doing.
Right.
So
and so
I
and
get
I think
it.
that's the thing that I want to like remind people of, like,
Yes.
content creators are not little robots. Like, we have to sleep, we have to eat. Sometimes we want to sit down and have a beer and like, you know, talk shit or whatever. I don't know. But like this idea, and I think that the thing about like OnlyFans and things like that is so often people are like, you are beholden to me, the audience.
Yes.
For new stuff. I want new stuff all the time. And it's like, I'm actually not interested in that kind of relationship.
Yeah.
You can come to my shows and give me money while I like engage with you. And that is as much as I'm willing to like create a transactional relationship.
Yes. And you know, it's absolutely hysterical. The same works for drag queens.
It's a whole, and like I think that
it's all about creating. It's all about creating a space where, you know, you can do what it is that you want to do. And it's definitely interesting that we've all sort of like, we've been evolving. We've definitely been evolving with the way that we present ourselves, because conventions aren't happening. Convention after parties aren't happening. Raves aren't happening anymore. And they're not going to be happening for, to my knowledge, at least a year. I think, who was it? I think Anita posted that there were conventions happening, like Colossal Con was planning on happening, Blurred Con was planning on happening. What was another one that she had said? But to hear someone suggesting, oh, well, by August, there'll be more conventions. I don't know. No.
My thing is like, even if there are, because I know like people are like, oh, I'm having a convention or I'm doing a shoot or whatever. I'm like, that's cute. I won't be there. I won't. Right? You know why? Because people pay me to host panels from my house.
Yeah.
Right? And I can continue to engage in the content and also be safe.
When
that is, to me, at this point in my life, it is more important that I remain safe.
Yeah.
Right. And that I create and I advocate for folks who maybe can't, right? They're like, sure, like I'm not an immunocompromised person, like all these other things, like, you know, I understand my privilege in that way, but like I'm going to continue to advocate for my friends who I know can't go to a convention. Right. And like they should continue to have access to those spaces, even when folks who feel like they're ready to go back into the real world start to program for those things.
Yeah. It's wonderful because I look at people like you, I look at people like Dax, I look at people like Philip O'Dango, I look at you guys, and I'm like, you guys are doing so wonderfully because you are continuing to be involved in these spaces where your voices are needed, where your voices need to be heard. And you know, it's always wonderful to hear like who's doing this for this convention, who's doing that for that convention. And a lot of the bigger name conventions, they knew better. They knew to say, we need people, we need voices that are not only have a sizable following, but that can provide content for us. Whether it's a panel on diversity, whether it's a panel on getting into cosplay, whether it's a panel on creating a cosplay, creating armor pieces. There's options. There are avenues to be taken for these conventions to sort of basically say,
still want the content. You know, people
still want the content.
People are interested. And I feel like that is a thing that the conventions who have reached out to me, like, I'm super grateful because they're like, hey, like sometimes they're like, hey, we want you to talk about a very specific thing. And I'm like, cool, I will build this panel for you. And sometimes they're like, we know that you be thinking about stuff, so whatever you think is a fun thing that you want to talk about, let's do it. And I'm like, ooh, like that's even better. Then I get to like invite the people that I want to invite and like things like that. So like, you know, I think it has been really great as like a content creator to have folks really, I at least have felt like folks are recognizing like, oh, you know, yes, I like spend time doing cosplay and I spend time, you know, dancing and like things like that. But like, I have a whole degree in like change management, right? So like, I have words to say, right? And I think deeply about things, and it has been really gratifying to be able to marry some of the work that I have done, you know, in my Muggle job, like in diversity, equity, and inclusion, in change management, in getting people to think through really hard problems, and also like existing in fandom.
So, basic question, very simple question. How did you get into cosplay?
So obviously I got into cosplay because of the homies, Tony Ray and Jay Justice. So I know Tony from like back when we were baby gays, somewhere in Brooklyn. Like there's definitely pictures of us when both of our locks were very short. And got in like 2009 or something. Ugh. Please don't look at those pictures. Like that's where I know Tony from. And you know, this was back when I was like super into Tumblr. And he would like talk about his build, and he would talk about all the things he was doing and all the people he was meeting. And I was like, oh, that sounds so cool. But I was in school in Wisconsin. So I came back to New York and I was really excited about the prospect of being back in New York and being in a space where I could engage in all the things. But I was like, oh, like I don't actually know how to do any of this. I don't know how to sew. I don't know how to.
That's usually how it starts.
What is an armor? I don't know. So I actually started, and Tony was really great because he was like, just like do some stuff, right? You're creative, like you're good with your hands, just like do some stuff. And we can like hang out at places and I'll introduce you to people. And like that was really it. So I went to my first like convention. Was LeakyCon. So like that was where I was doing like very like casual, like, you know, I was always a Potter kid. I'm literally wearing a Quidditch.
I was gonna say, to people who are unfamiliar, LeakyCon is a Harry Potter based convention.
Yeah, so before LeakyCon, they changed the name. LeakyCon was a Harry Potter based convention. And so that I went to that in like 2010, 2012, and was doing, you know, some soft cosplay there. A lot of closet cosplay, lots of like things that I had like built and like bought from like thrift stores and things like that. And then 2014 was my first New York Comic Con. So I like spent time, like the first 2 cosplays that I built. The first one was Lieutenant Uhura. Actually built a like Star Trek badge by hand, like from a Tumblr like post where it was like, glue all the little things together and cover it with aluminum foil and like all the things. And then Gwendolyn from Saga. If you've read Saga, because if you haven't, you should just go do that. But so I built her horns myself. I like built the little bandeau top, the staff, the jewelry. Like I built all of these things like by hand. It's funny because I went with my ex who built a Marco cosplay. So that we could just really do it. We were like, if you're gonna go hard. And it was really great because they were they were like, I don't know about this cosplay thing, but this should be fun. Like, we'll see how it goes. And I immediately was hooked. Like, people like walking into the space and people immediately like knowing who my character was and referring to me as Gwendolyn, and you know, just like being super excited about like this shoot that we, you know, my ex and I like literally like doing these like battle scenes. It was bananas, right? It was like a Saturday at New York Comic Con. I was exhausted
But do
at
you
the end of
remember the
it.
Saturdays of New York Comic Con when you were able to actually walk around and
Right
not
when
be
so many people that you couldn't breathe.
back when you were able to actually go to a convention and finish walking around the
and good
convention in a day.
Yeah. Yeah. So I distinctly remember the reason that I wore Gwendolyn to that day was because Brian K. Vaughan was going to be on a panel. And he's one of the creators of Saga. And so he also created Y the Last Man, and my favorite comic book character ever, Agent 325, is also a brainchild of Brian K. Vaughan. So I was like, I have to go see this man. 355 was like the first character that I saw in a comic, and I was like, I could be her. She could be me, right? She's Black, she's queer, she has locks, she shoots people. She's great. I love her. So I went to this thing, like, and it was talking about like comics and education. At the time I was a teacher. So I was like, oh, this is all of my interests converging. I show up, he does his panel. I get up to ask a question, like an actual question that I wanted him to answer. And he was like, before I answer your question, I just want to say you make the most amazing Gwendolyn. And then I had to sit down and cry because I like couldn't do it. I'm a person that has a lot of feelings. And like literally that day was the day I decided like this is a thing I'm going to be doing for as long as I can.
Well, that's a very inspiring story. Now I have to ask, how did you get into burlesque and pole?
So I've always been super interested in burlesque, like as an art form. Like I think the art of like the art of revelation is something like I'm a teacher, I'm a storyteller, I'm a facilitator, right? And like burlesque is a facilitated adventure, right? It's this person taking you on a journey, and like they're taking you on a journey by taking off their clothes or putting their clothes on, but it's still a story, right? It's a yarn that's being spun. And that to me is the way people spin a yarn, the way people tell a story, the way people take you on a journey has always been super fascinating to me.
You've been crocheting for a while, haven't you?
I literally have been crocheting so that has always been super fascinating to me. But I was like, you know, like I said, I was a teacher for a very long time. And so I didn't think that was the thing that I could do. Because there's a lot of stigma attached to burlesque and pole. And, you know, this was before the like viral stories of teachers being fired for going to a pole dancing class. Like even before those things, I knew that like as a Black woman and like the ways in which Black women are hypersexualized meant that were my students or my administrators or whoever to find out that this was a thing that I engaged in, I could lose my job. And so for a long time, I did not do it, right? I was excited about it and I loved the concept of it, but I was like, oh, I can't do this thing. And then someone invited me to a queer pole dancing class at a really great studio called Incredipole, which is queer owned. And I was like, you know what? Whatever. I'm just going to do it, right? I'm just going to go and see like how it is. Like maybe it'll be weird. Maybe it'll be great. I don't know. It was amazing. It was super gender affirming. As in like this, you get to like put on a version of like performance of femininity that like I don't live in, right? Like Queerly Femmetastic is my show name because like I get to sort of play up all the femme things that like I'm often too exhausted to exist in as a regular human. And I was like, oh, this is so good. And like pole dancing is fucking hard. Like I'm always gonna tell people that. They're like, I don't know. And I'm like, it's hard. Like I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I've been pole dancing since 2016, and I am literally still learning things and it engages I was a theater kid. I grew up dancing. I grew up performing. And it engages that part of my brain in a way that like a lot of us just kind of give that up when we get to be adults. We're like, I don't have time to perform. I don't have time to like tell a story. I don't have time.
You don't
create in that kind of way. And I'm like, but what if you do, right? And like sometimes it's a sexy story, and sometimes it's like weird sad girl mermaid realness. Like
I've never heard it put quite so eloquently.
And that's okay, right? And I think the reason I really enjoy pole and burlesque is because it gives me the space to create those kinds of things that, like, you know, with cosplay, often I'm moving through a character that has an arc already, right? And like I'm like, oh, like, you know, Ariel, y'all know I got like 1,500 Ariel cosplays. And like Ariel, like we see who she is and like what happens and how she engages and et cetera, right? So like that arc is already established, and I'm stepping into it from it, like Superman or like Luke Cage or any of the other like characters that I cosplay very, very often.
Yeah.
Right. And with burlesque, I think the thing that I enjoy is like I have a couple of cosplay burlesque numbers. Like I get to think about what else happens, right? What happens when the camera's off, right? So like I have a burlesque number that's about Nubia like waking up in the morning and being exhausted, but knowing she has to go save the world, right? And it's like it's a morning routine. Like she gets up, she stretches, she's like, I don't want to get out of bed. She has to get dressed. Like there's this whole thing, right? And at the end, she's a superhero, right? But in the beginning, you saw this like very soft person, and you get to see her like literally put on.
You see the to perform the vulnerability of a character that is always depicted as being not so vulnerable. It's fascinating, and it's another layer for viewers to see the character in, whether or not they're portrayed on the big screen or on the or on a computer screen. They're still seeing a character go through an arc of some kind.
And I get to like decide what that arc is and get to hold people, like hold a captive audience and be like, you have to listen to the story now. And people are into it. And so I think that it's a different lens than cosplay.
Yes. So in terms of burlesque and burlesque, would you say that it is sometimes... Do you feel that the performative is better received than the outright quote-unquote cosplay modeling that we usually hear people complain about the most?
Yeah, I feel like there is an inherent consent that people engage in. When you go to a burlesque show, you are consenting to this performed sensuality, right? You are opting into it.
Mm-hmm. And
I think that some of the critiques around lewd cosplay or cosplay modeling are really valid, not because of the like puritanical shenanigans, but because of this piece around consent, right? Has someone consented to engage like sexually or sensually with you in this character, as this character, right? And I think that that's actual, if people framed it more like that, I think we would get less of an argument, right? Because like I'm very clear, I'm like, oh, there are characters that I'm willing to engage in and think about them as sexual creatures, right? Like and think about them, you know, so for some of them it's really easy, right? And then for some of them I'm like, I don't know that I want to do like a sexy like Misty cosplay or a sexy like who's another cosplay that's like a child. I don't know, Ash Ketchum. I don't know, one of them.
I mean, so to that point, I've definitely seen a lot of people raise some eyebrows. Like, I remember there was a Chucky Finster cosplayer
Right.
that was this a very attractive young woman in this kinky curly red wig, very form fitting blue T-shirt with the planet emblem on it, midriff showing. I think there were booty shorts involved. I'm trying to like remember the
There was like
cosplay as it was.
something. Yeah.
It was some of that effect. How so? We'll put burlesque on the back burner for now because I definitely want to talk more about that because I love burlesque. I've always loved burlesque. I enjoy the artistry. I enjoy the performance. I just enjoy all of it. But how do you feel as someone who has done a sort of lewd-ish type of cosplay where you've taken a character and you've sort of sensualized them and you're within the character's own sensuality. How do you feel when somebody does that with a child?
I personally don't love it. Like, I don't think that I would do. Like,
and let me preface by saying when I say child, I mean a child character, a character that is a child.
That's the thing that always, like, it's not quite a squick. And this is how you know I'm old because I'm like, here is old internet language. But, like, it's not quite a squick, but it always. I can see why it makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right. Because it is some of it is nostalgia, right? Like, we have connected to those characters when we were in a space where sensuality wasn't, or rather, let me pause and like
where sensuality wasn't the norm, we can say.
Right. And even like, and I want to reframe that, right? Because as children, actually, we are the most sensual beings, right? We love anything that has to do with like touch and taste, and like we want all the sugar and all the excitement and all the stimulus, but it's not sexual, right? Yeah. And so I think that children are incredibly sensual creatures. Like, they actually really do love to engage all of their senses all the time, which is why they're exhausting. So shout out to kids.
Yes, children are definitely exhausting.
But the sexual aspect, the overt sexual aspect of it is a thing that I understand why it makes people uncomfortable. I'm not a person who I'm like, nah, live your best life. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm never gonna be like, you should never create a sexy Misty cosplay, or like, I don't ever want to see you do like an Angelica cosplay with a bikini. Like no, because everybody's grown. Everybody needs to do what makes them happy. But I think it's piece around like consent. Yes. And so, for me, and in the age of social media, it's actually really hard to engage in like practical consent culture, right? Because like, if you follow me on the internet, right, you're gonna see whatever the algorithm, the Instagram algorithm shows you. Mm-hmm. And so, I think sometimes, where places like OnlyFans and Patreon and stuff come in is that it allows people to opt in to those things. And I think that is a good thing, right? So folks can say like, I am interested in the content that this person creates, and so I'm willing to pay for it and engage with it there. And then like, for folks who are like, that's not my thing, they don't have to engage.
Yeah.
I think that where I see the most brouhaha is actually in conventions, right? In live, in-person spaces, because there is an implied consent to you having come into the space, right? Like, you're in the space, you consent to experience the space with everyone else.
Yes.
I think one year we went to Katsu and everyone was doing Kill la Kill, everything. And me, I love boobs. So I wasn't mad. But there were some folks who were like, this is a feeling space. And it's like, actually, it's not. There are very few things in the rules that say, like, from this hour to this hour, we expect people of these ages to be here, like, which is different from like New York Comic Con on a Sunday, right? Like, I wouldn't wear my, most magical and most sexy cosplay to a New York Comic Con Sunday.
Well, to that point, there's definitely. I personally would never wear some of the costumes that I've worn to Katsucon on any day at a convention, at like a convention like New York Comic Con. There's. I feel like because Katsucon takes place in a hotel, it'll be the same thing as Dragon Con. Because Dragon Con takes place in a series of hotels, you're able to get away. I don't want to use the term. I don't want to use "get away with" because that implies that there's like something wrong with doing it. Right. But there are just some cosplays that I would not wear because they are very revealing on me, and that because it is revealing on me, I will be subject to the same I am subject to different criticisms. We as individuals are subject to different criticisms. For the certain cosplays that we wear to certain conventions.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree. Like, I definitely know that, like, there are cosplays. So, like, I live in New York most of the time, so I commute from wherever I'm living at home to New York Comic Con in full cosplay, right? And so I build my cosplays with the understanding that I'm gonna get on a train in this cosplay, right? Can I do that safely? Right. Yes. Whereas when I'm at Dragon Con or Blurred Con or, Katsu, my whole booty butt cheeks be out. And like
same.
Because everyone in the everyone who's there, right, in the space has consented to be a part of the convention. And the difference, and I think Dragon Con is a special example because while it takes place in a series of hotels, the people of Atlanta did not consent. Walking around downtown Atlanta with our whole booty butt cheeks out. They didn't consent to that. And so, and it's funny because like when I go to Atlanta, like I'll get in a cab or something, the drivers are always like, "You going to that convention?" And because I'm usually in house, you're like, "What? Can you tell me why people just dress up and come here? I don't understand."
It was one New York Comic Con. I was on the Lear, and I was going to New York Comic Con, and I was in my Raven outfit. And I said to myself, I'm going to drive to the train station, I'm going to pack my costume, and I'm just going to go into the bathroom and get changed. Because I didn't care. So there I am, New York Comic Con, getting off the Long Island Railroad in my black leotard with the long cape and the boots and the just everything. And I was like, wow, I did that. But no one on that train consented to seeing all my legs. No one on that train consented to see all my ass hanging out of that damn leotard. But that's one of the reasons why you have
like there's some New York is different from Atlanta, right? Yeah. So like people literally when I remember I grew up in Brooklyn and I've lived in Brooklyn for many years, and so when I roll out and I'm walking down the streets of Brooklyn in my like Supergirl outfit, and I really love when I do princesses. Little black girls are like, "You're a princess." Like they love being like, they get really "You're a princess," and I'm like, "Yeah, I am. You too are a princess." Like I love that shit. But literally, you can hear people saying like, "Oh, it must be that convention weekend," like on the train where you're like, "Here's me with my sword and my shield and my wig out to here," and people are like, "Oh, it must be that convention. That must be what's happening."
Yep. It's wild taking public transit to the city. It's wild walking from there to the Javits
Yeah.
Center or to
Yeah.
wherever the convention is happening. It's
Yeah.
it's a wild experience. It is genuinely a wild experience.
Yeah.
And
I definitely like I've had some really great experiences. Like I think it wasn't my first katsu actually. It was my first katsu. We were just like standing on it. It was the one where it was like 70 degrees randomly. Unlike when it's like a katsu when it like snows.
yes,
So it was 70 degrees. We're like standing on the pier. I was probably hungover, but this little girl, like I was just like sitting there because I was like, oh, it's a nice day. Like we're just outside. And the pier is open to like boat, right? And this little girl who was also wearing a Supergirl like shirt ran up to me, right? And I was like, oh, and she was like, oh, and we just I'm sure there's a picture somewhere of us like looking at each other being excited about the fact that we like saw each other, right? And I was like, oh, this is the kind of like it happens to me like when I'm wearing Ariel cosplays, little girls and like Ariel t-shirts run up to me and they're like, oh my god, and I'm like, oh my god. But like that part is amazing. I love that, right? I don't love, and it always happens when I'm cosplaying a villain or like a villain. Because I have complex feelings about villains.
of course.
That like dudes are like, and I'm like, do you not see that I have a sword? Like, did you miss the sword? Because there's sometimes I have two swords. What why are you doing this with me right now? So I think that is a thing. So I've had like really amazing experiences in cosplay with like just like randos on the street or on the train or wherever. And I've also had like really scary and terrible experiences where I'm like, I might have to punch this person if they don't leave me alone.
Yeah.
And I think that piece around consent is the issue right there, right? Because in that space, I am not consenting to be treated like an object, right? Or to be treated like, a non-sentient creature. And that person thinks that that person believes that my clothing gives them the consent in order to engage with me like that, right? And I think that's a big thing that happens often with lewd cosplay is folks are like, all right, well, if I have seen you, if I've seen like this much of your skin, right? Or if I've seen this much of your body, then I'm entitled to engage with you in X, Y, or Z way, right? And that's just really not true.
I feel I've always been trying to put this into words. If comic book artists and animated television show movie illustrators didn't focus solely on the attractiveness of a character, there wouldn't be this idea that you can buy that, and that because you can buy it, you can touch whomever you want that is that character. And I always try very hard to like put that into words and formulate it into sentences, and I always end up failing. But I think that's one of the bigger problems. The problem is these
I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's the like objectification of the like main. Usually it's either the main character or like the protagonist or the antagonist, right?
Yeah.
Like the girl who's the main character and she's so sweet and so cute. And the boy who's like, I'm a boy and I have feelings, but I won't talk about them.
Yeah.
And like that whole thing, and I'm really thinking about anime in that moment, but like that whole thing of like those people are often created and treated as objects. Exactly. And therefore when I show up in my little Todoroki outfit, then I become this object. Is like, actually no, like Todoroki's a whole complex character.
There's also a person in that costume. There's a human being within that attire. Why are you touching them inappropriately?
I also think that like, and I really have to catch myself. Like, I'm a Black girl from Brooklyn. Like, if you roll up on me and startle me, you could get hit. Like,
Yeah.
I just like, because like I'm 5'3" and like 180 pounds. I'm small. Like people,
Small
I
but
had to
mighty. She is
learn.
small but mighty.
I will hit you if you startle me. And it literally is because I've learned that people don't care for my consent sometimes and will just put their hands on my body. And like
Yeah.
I've had to learn that, right? And like when it inevitably happens that someone does touch me and I freak out, then it's like, oh well, it's not even that big a deal. I'm like, actually,
But
it is.
so.
Because I could clearly name all of the places where this was a like low-key assault, right? But you then people, oh well, I don't know, you didn't even have to, and I wasn't even. Oh, okay. So then walk away. Right? Because like I think that people don't the point that you just made around there's a human being inside of that cosplay, and you need to treat that human being as such
Yep.
is a thing that people like don't get. And like I understand, that we have this like cosplay is not consent thing that we more and more folks are bringing into the conversation around safety plans inside of conventions. But we also need to have that conversation around how we engage with folks online, right? Like me doing my like favorite Starfire like lingerie is not consent for literally if I had the energy to put up all of the fucking disgusting messages that I get, and not even on my dance page, right? Because my dance page where my whole actual booty butt cheeks be out. This is on my cosplay page where like it's, I'm like, ooh, look at this sword that I spent so much time building, and people were like, ooh, you look so great, and I'm really into it. And I'm like, no. This me putting a picture up of something that I was proud of is not an invitation for you to treat me as an object. It just isn't.
Right. I laugh because my girlfriend Kristen. She posted, I want to say a couple of months ago, saying that she lost a pretty substantial number of followers when she posted that she had a baby. Because it's like you can no longer objectify her because she has had a child. Like the mentality behind that, the mental gymnastics that one has to jump through in order for someone to say, oh well, I'm going to unfollow this. But that really concerns me. That genuinely concerns me. But it's been that way forever. And I'm grateful that there is a very obvious change happening with the Me Too movement, the cases against Harvey Weinstein, the cases against Joss Whedon, like these individuals who are incredibly nasty, negative, upsetting men are getting their just desserts for being abusive and being nightmares, basically.
Yeah. And I think more than anything, like, and I, once upon a time I was a teacher, and so I like have to think about this often, is how often students would come to me and say it's the thing that happened to me, or it's the thing that's going on, but I can't talk to anybody about it because no one will believe me or things like that. And I think it's so, while it is incredibly intense to experience people talking about like these really nightmarish situations that they were trapped in, right?
Yeah, that is a word that I have definitely seen mentioned a number of times. Yeah. Trapped.
Yeah. Trapped, right? It's also super important that folks hear like it's not just me who's experiencing this, right? It's important that folks hear like this is the big thing that I constantly have to remind, folks when I was working with young folks, like, if you do not ask for help, right? Like no one, I don't know what's happening, right? The adults in your life don't know what's happening. Even your peers may be able to help you, but they can't do that if you don't let them know, like, hey, something's going on. It doesn't make me feel good. And
it's fear. A lot of we all know that the obvious problem that a lot of people are experiencing is fear. And that is very much the case, where it's like, if I come out against this person, what's going to happen to me?
What's going to happen to me? Right. And like, I think this is something that there's a couple different ways to think about it, like survivor-led interventions, right? So like, not just like, I heard a bad thing about this person, so we're going to go on this like crusade to crucify this person, right? Instead of saying like, hey, woman or man or non-binary human who has experienced harm, what would make you feel better? What do you need in this moment, right? So instead of centering the person who has done the harm, right? How do we make the time to center the person who has experienced the harm, right? Let's take the time to find out what they need. Right? Do they need an apology? Do they need this person to go to jail? Like, what, or do they need this person to like commit to going to therapy? Like, whatever that is, if we spent a little bit more time listening to the survivors, right? And centering the healing process on the survivor, as opposed to this like punitive justice thing that we like to do. I think that would allow, because this fear that you were talking about comes from folks often being like, well, the person who has done the harm is going to try and avoid being punished. So they're going to discredit me. They're going to say nasty things about me. Like, all of this stuff is going to happen because they don't want to get hurt, right? They don't want to be punished. And it's like, what if we cut that cycle off, right? What if we said like, all right, person who's done harm, you will have to face consequences, but those consequences will be based on the needs of the person who experienced the harm, right? And if you decide not to do that, then we could talk about something else. But let's start there.
I think it's always important to have the conversation. It's always important to have the conversation with the survivors. Because they're the ones that it happened to. They're the ones that need to. They're the ones that need to have the conversation. They're the one that needs to be. They're the ones that need to be told.
Yeah.
They're the ones that need to be told. This wasn't your fault. What happened to you was not your fault. They need to be told that, because sometimes, more often than not, they're the ones that are told, "Oh well, yeah, it was all your fault. Sorry."
This happened because you did X, Y, or Z.
Exactly.
Right. And so I think this piece around, and I've had this conversation with folks, even about cosplay, right? They're like, oh, well, you invite those kinds of comments, or you invite those kinds of DMs or whatever, because you post lewd cosplay, right? Or because you post, sensual or sexual material. And it's like, actually, no, that's not how any of this works. First of all. And second of all, like, I think folks spend a lot of time in this, like, this punitive system of like, oh, something bad happens, so we have to punish the person who did it, right? But that cycle of harm doesn't go away.
No.
If that's how we treat people who engage in harm, right? It
needs to be addressed the same way all types of mental illnesses have to be addressed. It needs to be focused on the same way other types of mental illnesses are focused on.
Right, it has to be a holistic approach.
Yeah.
Right? Like, someone who engages in harming other people doesn't do that just out of the clear blue sky, right?
And
there are reasons.
Being reprimanded isn't fixing the problem.
Yeah, because they're just gonna go on and harm somebody else.
Exactly.
Right. And so, like, what are the things that the person who was harmed needs in order to begin their healing process? And what are the things who the person who engaged in that harm, what do they need so that they don't keep repeating that cycle? Right. And like, this is like moving into like restorative justice, and like restorative justice is hard. Transformative justice is even harder.
Yes.
And it's literally a process and like concept that I've been wrestling with for actually 10 years. Because I'm like, I just theoretically understand it, but like as like a person who has experienced harm, right, and experienced violence, right, I'm like, I've been conditioned to want to punish someone who has harmed me.
Absolutely.
Right? And I have to, we spend all of this time learning like that's the way the world works. And it's like, what if it isn't, right? What if every time I get a message from like some douchebag dude who's like, something about my ass, I'm like, hey, that doesn't make me feel good. I'm a person, and if you're going to talk to me like that, then you can engage with my content. Like,
yeah,
that instead of this like punitive thing, right? And yes, it's labor. I'm like, I just want to name now, like, hey, doing that work, that sending that message instead of just blocking that person is labor.
Yes, it is.
But it's labor that like maybe will mean that person will not go on and do the same thing and say the same thing and harm somebody else.
The problem is sometimes it's a conversation, sometimes it's therapy, sometimes it's, I don't want to use the term excessive measures, but something measures more than what has just been stated. So more than therapy. Whether it's jail time, whether it's sensitivity training, there should always be there should always be a type of, not punishment, but there should always be some type of treatment for people that have engaged in these types of conversations. It could even start with sending dick pics, sending random dick pics to people, or sending. I have never in my life experienced someone sending random vagina shots to people, and I don't know if that's a thing. I only know a very queer male mindset, which is sending random dick pics to people is bad, and the people that do it should be held accountable. And that is the biggest crux. These people who are doing the harm need to be held accountable. Where did she go? Oh no, where did she go? We're so close. Oh no. Oh no, where did she go? Oh dear. Oh, wait, hold on.
I'm back.
I was gonna say we only have 2 minutes left.
Okay, yeah, I was like, what's going on?
What I was basically saying, I don't know if you heard it, was that these people who are doing harm to others need to be held accountable. What that accountability looks like, as you said, is determined by what the survivor wants to have happen.
Right. And I think that's important, and I think it's important for us to, you know, especially as we start to or as we continue to have conversations about what it means for folks to engage in sexuality and sensuality in a way that allows them to be safe.
Yes.
That is like the thing that I keep coming back to is like, we have to, it's not just about like what I do, right, as the content creator. It's about what other people do, and how they engage with me, right? Because humans are relational and we exist together.
We are all connected in the great race of humans.
Yeah.
So, with that said, with the last few moments that we have together, first of all, I adore you. We could talk for literally hours on end about practically anything. and I worship the ground you walk on. Please let people know where they can find you. I have below like is underscore she underscore okay of the Cheers and Queers podcast. But is that all? Should I put anything else down?
Yeah, like if folks are looking for me, obviously I'm at Is She Okay? If you're looking for my dance stuff, that's you can definitely find that through my Instagram. Cheers and Queers is our podcast. I'm literally editing the next episode tonight after I get off with you. And those are like, that's it. Like I'm really trying to like be better about being like, you can find me here, and you can find me here.
That was honestly what I did, because one of the really tragic things, and I learned this when I was doing Kat and Kristen, was I need one name for everything. Otherwise, it's one name for this, one name for that, one name for that social media, and it just gets really confusing. Yeah. So it's just convenient to have one name for everything. So I completely and totally get
it. Cosplay. I'm Queerly Femmetastic Burlesque. I'm Queerly Femmetastic pole dance. Like I'm always Queerly Femmetastic. I'm Is She Okay on Twitter and Instagram. If you're not a Twitter person, I'll be talking shit on Twitter. It's mostly me talking shit like I do.
Well, I absolutely adore you. I would love to have you back on to discuss whatever you want to talk about. I love you so much. And I want to thank you again for being on the show tonight.
Of course. Thank you. It was super fun to like have a conversation with another human that's not about work.
Well, I adore you. Join me next week for another fabulous episode of Catt Chatt. My name is That Tomcat. You can find me everywhere under That Tomcat's name. It's literally just everywhere. Ciao meow for now, guys, and I'll see you next week.